Here's a genuinely strange fact about the Australian retirement system. Right now, a retiree who owns a $5 million house can receive the full age pension. Meanwhile, a retiree renting a modest unit with $1.5 million in super can receive absolutely nothing. Not a reduced pension, nothing at all. Same country, same system, same age. One of them is, on paper, considerably less wealthy than the other, and the less wealthy one is the one getting zero government support. Meet Grace and Colin. Both 67, both retired, both living in Sydney. Grace owns her home outright, a beautiful place she bought decades ago that's now worth around $5 million. Beyond that, she's got very little else, maybe $50,000 sitting in the bank. Colin never bought. He's rented his whole life, but he's been a genuinely disciplined saver, and he's built up $1.5 million in superannuation. By most measures, Grace is the wealthier of the two by a wide margin, but under the current rules, she gets the full pension and Colin gets nothing. Let's find out why and what it actually means for both of them over the next 20 years. Here's the rule that explains everything. Under the age pension assets test, your family home is completely exempt. It doesn't matter if it's worth $500,000 or $50 million. Centrelink simply doesn't count it. Every other asset does get counted, though. Superannuation, savings, shares, investment properties, all of it. Grace's $5 million home is invisible to the assets test. Her $50,000 in the bank is nowhere near the threshold, so she qualifies for the full pension, currently worth around $31,000 a year without any reduction at all. Colin's $1.5 million in super, on the other hand, is fully counted. It sits enormously far above the upper threshold where any pension entitlement cuts out completely. So, despite having a fraction of Grace's overall wealth, Colin gets nothing from the age pension. Not a partial payment. Nothing. Grace's day-to-day life is genuinely comfortable. No rent, no mortgage, and every fortnight the pension lands in her account. Between the low cost of owning a paid-off home and that regular government income, she's not wealthy in terms of cash flow, but she's completely secure. There's another layer to this, too. If Grace ever needs residential aged care down the track, her status as a pensioner can mean access to significantly more generous government support toward those costs, potentially worth up to $150,000 compared to someone assessed as having sufficient means to cover it themselves. Meanwhile, her house just sits there, quietly appreciating, completely untouched by any of this. Colin's situation looks very different day to day. He's paying market rent every single week, drawing on his own super to cover both that and his general living costs, with zero pension supplement to soften any of it. If the market has a bad year, that's entirely his problem, absorbed straight out of his own balance. And when it comes to aged care, if Colin ever needs it, he'll very likely be assessed as having sufficient means to pay close to the full market rate, with little to no government subsidy, precisely because his $1.5 million sitting in super makes him look, on paper, like someone who doesn't need help. Let's follow both of them to age 87, the same age used in the actual research behind this debate. Grace's home, appreciating at a modest 4% a year, the kind of long-run growth Harborside Sydney property has genuinely delivered, is now worth somewhere around $11 million. On top of that, she's received 2 full decades of pension payments, cumulatively worth several $100,000, none of which she ever needed to draw from savings because she had almost no other costs to cover. Her overall position hasn't just held up, it's grown enormously, with the government topping up her income the entire way.
Colin, meanwhile, has spent 20 years paying market rent and covering every living cost from his own pocket, with zero pension supplement at any point. Drawing down at a rate that felt sustainable at the start, but with rent rising every year and zero government support to lean on, his $1.5 million balance has shrunk considerably, down to somewhere around $400,000 by 87. And if he needs aged care now, he's likely facing close to the full cost, with a much thinner buffer left to pay it from than he had 20 years earlier. So the person who started with dramatically less overall wealth has ended up needing considerably more support and received considerably less of it.
This exact gap has prompted a genuine policy proposal worth understanding, not because it's guaranteed to happen, but because it's a live debate right now. One policy research group has proposed excluding only the first $500,000 of home equity from the assets test, with everything above that counted the same way super and savings already are. Under that model, Grace's home would still shield the first $500,000 entirely, but the remaining $4.5 million of equity would start counting toward her pension eligibility, almost certainly reducing or eliminating her payment. The modeling behind the proposal suggests a change like this could free up somewhere around $9.9 billion a year in government spending, with the vast majority of that saving coming from the wealthiest homeowning retirees, not from people like Colin. The research also argues that even with more home equity counted, most affected retirees would still end up with more net wealth by age 7 than they started with, simply because long-run property growth has historically outpaced what a means-tested pension reduction would actually cost them. Now, in fairness, this isn't a simple case of an obvious unfairness with an easy fix. There's a genuinely strong case on the other side too, and it's worth taking seriously. Plenty of homeowners in Grace's position didn't set out to become asset rich. They bought an ordinary home in an ordinary suburb decades ago, one that happened to become extremely valuable simply because of where it was, not because of any deliberate wealth strategy. Forcing a change to how that's assessed can feel like penalizing people for staying in the same house for 40 years while the market moved around them. There's also a very real human concern about forcing older Australians into difficult decisions late in life. If home equity above a threshold started counting toward the pension, some retirees could be pushed toward reverse mortgages, government-backed loans against the family home, or ultimately selling and downsizing, none of which is necessarily a bad outcome financially, but all of which can be genuinely disruptive for someone in their 80s who simply wants to stay put near their community in the home they raised their family in. And politically, the family home has been treated as sacrosanct in Australian pension policy for decades. Any change here would be enormously contested, and rightly so, since it touches something far more personal than a simple balance sheet. So where does that leave Grace and Colin? Neither of them did anything wrong. Grace didn't game the system. She simply bought a home decades ago and stayed in it. Colin didn't make a mistake either. He rented sensibly and saved diligently the whole way through. But the current rules, built around a simple exemption for the family home regardless of its value, have produced a genuinely striking gap between two retirees who by any reasonable measure don't have anywhere near equal wealth. Whether the fix is excluding home equity above a threshold, some other mechanism entirely, or leaving the system as it is, that gap is real and it's worth understanding regardless of which side of the debate you land on. Grace ended up considerably wealthier over 20 years, supported the entire way by a system that simply doesn't see her home as an asset at all. Colin ended up needing far more help than he received, precisely because the one thing he built his security around, his super, is the one thing the system counts against him in full. This isn't a video telling you which side of the reform debate is right. It's a genuinely contested question, with real, sympathetic arguments on both sides. But if you're anywhere near retirement yourself,
Whether you own a valuable home, hold savings outside it, or both, it's worth understanding exactly how differently the current system treats those two forms of wealth, because that gap is very real right now, regardless of what happens to the rules from here. If this helped you understand a debate you'll likely keep hearing about, hit subscribe for more videos unpacking the everyday money decisions Australians over 50 are actually making right now. And let me know in the comments, do you think the family home should stay fully exempt, or is it time that changed? See you in the next one.